Hello, everyone. I'm Hallie Balkin. I'm with Defense Acquisition University. I'm the learning director there, and we have a very exciting panel today. We're going to be discussing beyond other transaction authority or beyond OTA. So I first wanted to introduce our wonderful panel. We have Jaime Garcia. Jaime Garcia has over 20 years of acquisition experience and currently oversees the development of the Procurement Innovation Branch in the Office of Chief Procurement Officer at the IRS. Jaime and his team aim to transform the procurement culture. So thank you for being here, Jaime.
Good morning.
All right, next we have Paulie Hall. Paulie has over 20 years of experience in acquisitions and is the director of the Procurement Innovation Lab at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We're very excited to have you here, Paulie.
Great to be here. Thanks, Hallie.
Thanks. And last but not least, we have Michael Madsen with Defense Innovation Unit, DIU. I'm just so used to the acronym. And Mike is the Director of Strategic Engagement at DIU. And he also has over 20 years of extensive experience in acquisitions and as an Air Force officer in the field. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Hallie. Great to be here.
All right, so with that, we can jump right in. We have a lot of topics we're going to discuss and give you some real world and real life examples of how the government is utilizing acquisition tools to go beyond other transaction authority or beyond OTA. So first, we'll start with opening the ecosystem. And Jaime, we'll go to you and we'll hear what you would like to share.
Thanks, Hallie. So interestingly enough, as these things tend to happen, I saw an interesting discussion on LinkedIn about creating an environment to innovate and transform procurement. And the question really stemmed around, is contracting all about just compliance? And there was some wonderful comments on this thread, because obviously the answer is no. I mean, we need our contracting officers to be business advisors, to be strategic partners to both internal and external customers. But what's really hampering that transformation is creating an environment, an ecosystem, if you will, of culture and being able to take risks and having the kind of top cover, if you will, and having the impetus to do that. Because right now what's happening, there's obviously a lot of talk about transformation, innovation, doing things differently. And that's really tied to the presidential management agenda and cross-agency prioritization goals, the CAP goals. So, how do we do that? Well, certainly there's certain agencies that are leading that charge. I mean, Paulie with DHS is kind of the gold standard for us, trying to emulate a lot of what they're doing. But really, it really focuses on leadership and what we were talking about, and creating, again, that culture where we want to do things differently, because we do see a lot of, telling contracting officers that you have to do things differently. You have to innovate and try different things. But then that's basically it. There's really no desire to change the way that we're doing things ultimately, because we are compliance driven. And that's really the transformative effect that we're trying to do at the Internal Revenue Service, is really take a look holistically at how we can do that. That's certainly why the Procurement Innovation Branch was stood up. Inside where we fall is the Acquisition Management and Planning Division, which is really to be the front door to procurement and really try to integrate a lot of the CAP goals, specifically with customer experience, transforming that experience both for internal and external customers, in addition to really creating an environment where we can have that frictionless acquisition and be more a commercial buyer. And that's a little bit more challenging for us because we don't have OTA authority. We don't have CSOP. We don't even have R&D or those types of flexibilities. So we've been very fortunate to have a very good forward-leaning group of innovators at IRS to create our Pilot IRS program, which is really about hitting that culture of change from leadership down to execution. And Pilot IRS program, for those who are not privy to this program. It really centers around modular contracting, really about prototyping, commercial buying. We're using flexibilities of the federal acquisition regulation to do that, of course, but it's really to get us to think more about lowering risk, lowering barriers to entry for the commercial market, and really being more buying like a venture capitalist. That's important to us, and that transformation certainly will continue as we're starting to now transform the enterprise, not just procurement, with our new digitization office that's now being co-led by our former Deputy Chief Procurement Officer, Harrison Smith, who many of you know. So there's a lot of great change that's happening at IRS in regards to creating that ecosystem, that culture of change, but it really starts, in my opinion, with creating a strong strategic partnership between leadership and execution so that people have the impetus to change. They want to change, but more importantly, have the tools, the techniques, and the resources to be able to do that and learn from mistakes, that failure is not a bad thing, that we do have to take those risks and do things differently. So that's really the ecosystem that we're working on at IRS and across the federal acquisition environment, to be transformative and do things differently, but to do it in a way that's not just, as I like to say, kind of like talk. Really, it's backed up by actions, and that's really how transformation will start. And I actually wrote a blog post recently about this, from really starting from the ground up and getting a crowdsourcing from the folks in the field to be able to transform and get their buy-in and their desire to do it, because that's how change will ultimately happen, not only here at IRS, but across the federal government. Thank you.
Great things happening at the IRS. And for those of you watching, please feel free to write in questions. This is definitely a conversation that we want to have with you. So please feel free, as topics come up that you'd like to opine in or ask questions, please feel free to do so in the chat.
Holly, I'd like to pick up that thread that Jaime started us on with the ecosystem, and he hit on a couple of points that I want to dive into a little bit further. One was being a commercial buyer, lowering the barriers to entry, and then transformation. To quickly level set on DIU was started by then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter about 5 years ago, 2015, as a way to reinvigorate the connective tissue between government and the tech ecosystem across country, primarily Silicon Valley, but really across country, and to rebuild that triangle of academia, industry, and government that did burst Silicon Valley back in the 60s. Our mission, his original charge, was to accelerate commercial technology to solve DoD problems. The second one was to transform, as Jaime indicated, transform the capabilities and capacities of the department. And the last one was to strengthen the national security innovation base, which we see as an evolution of that triangle of academia and industry. Now, briefly, no reason for anyone to memorize that. I took the trouble of writing them down right here that we can reference back as we go through today. But why did Ash Carter do this? In the 1960s, about 40% of global R&D was U.S. Defense Department related. 40%, that's a lot. All the technology of consequence, GPS, overhead imagery, microelectronics, touchscreens, were all developed by the government, and then they moved into the tech sector in the form of the cell phones that we have now. Now, DoD's share of global R&D is about 4%. And all the technology of interest, AI, robotics, autonomy, biotechnology, all of those are being developed in the commercial sector, and we need to find a way to get them into the department. And that really was the intent of Ash Carter at the time, was how can we make DoD a more sophisticated partner? How can we lower barriers of entry to all of these tech companies that really didn't look at DoD as a viable trading partner? And in response to that, DIU pioneered the commercial solutions opening, which is a competitive process to rapidly bring in those non-traditional companies. Our authority to operate specifically calls out non-traditionals, but there are provisions to work with traditional vendors. And then using other transaction authority, we have been able to move at commercial speeds across our 6 tech focus areas: AI, ML, autonomy, human systems, commercial space, cybersecurity, and we just added another one of advanced energy and materials, which corresponds to the commercial sector and the investment taking place in those areas. And what we did is we looked to award a prototype contract in 60 to 90 days, getting to Jaime's point of lowering those barriers to entry to customers in the commercial tech sector. Many tech companies with leading edge technology have previously evaluated the $750 billion defense marketplace and said no thanks, because it's too hard, there are too many barriers. So we represent those lowering of those barriers, open up the ecosystem across the country for bringing in that technology to the government, making it relatively easy to do business with the government. We don't short circuit the compliance mechanism that Jaime mentioned, or the FAR. We're just another authorized mechanism to rapidly prototype technology and bring it into government.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Mike. Wow, 60 to 90 days to award. That's a pretty fast time period. And for those of you not familiar with what a non-traditional company is, that is specifically defined. And for your reference, it means a company that does less than $50 million of government business in their prior reporting year. So that is our definition that we're working with when Mike references that, which
Right.
you might hear a lot today about non-traditionals.
Right.
All right. So with that, we have some really interesting examples of FAR flexibility. So operating within the FAR and the flexibility that we are provided. So Paulie, can you speak to us about what you have been doing and some of the exciting and interesting projects that have been successful at DHS?
It's absolutely my pleasure to. I just want to share, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Department of Homeland Security's Procurement Innovation Lab, a little bit about our structure and what we were set up to accomplish. 5 years ago, our Chief Procurement Officer, recognizing that there were a few things that she wanted to drive in her new role, primarily dispelling the myth that the federal acquisition workforce and contracting process discourages creativity and innovation, innovative thinking, wanting to transition our organization from a process-driven to an outcome-focused acquisition system by empowering our teams across DHS to collaborate and drive improved outcomes through our procurement process, and definitely to shorten those buying cycles and to focus on buying commercial products and services so that acquisition life cycles can mirror the commercial sector and definitely help us move away from buying obsolete goods and services to support our mission. And so we launched the lab, which is a voluntary safe space where procurement teams across DHS can come in and obtain leadership support, as well as a procurement innovation coach to help their team strategize as early in the acquisition process as we can encourage what they're trying to accomplish, what those outcomes for the mission need to be, and then building a engaging and appropriate model for their acquisition strategy to drive to those outcomes both efficiently but also effectively. What we're doing is together learning to manage our risks better, and we're not avoiding the risks anymore. We're not being driven by protests, but rather by what the mission needs when the mission needs it. And collectively, we're really shaping that future acquisition system that we all know is better off. It's better off for our mission. It's better off for our industry partners who want to come in and deliver what they can to support our mission. But it's also better for our workforce when they can come in and recognize their role in delivering DHS mission, not just awarding a contract. And they have room in our process to do that and to do that together. They're happier, they're more satisfied, they're more comfortable taking those risks and bringing their new ideas to the table because they feel supported. And so really it's a cultural model that is being focused on here at the Department of Homeland Security. We've asked our workforce repeatedly since we started back in 2015, do you believe that innovation is encouraged in your acquisition organization? And I just want to share results with you because I think they're telling that we're making the progress we're trying to accomplish. In March of 2017, 2 years after we launched, 43% of our acquisition workforce stated there was room for innovation and support for innovation. By 2019, that number went to 49%. And when we surveyed our folks back in July, in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of all of the additional requirements, plus the turmoil going on in many of our workforce members' homes, 59% of the acquisition workforce felt that there was support for innovation. And so we really do see that this voluntary model is driving the outcomes we're trying to accomplish. I'm going to give you a story of one team that really was able to accomplish what they needed to within the flexibilities of the FAR. And it kind of links back to commercial solutions opening. We had a program office that needed to obtain non-helium-3 solutions for backpacks for our domestic nuclear detection office. It's now our Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction. Their old backpacks weren't the right technology, and they needed to create backpacks that could be used by their front line that had the new non-helium-3 technology in it. They originally were going to go out with commercial solutions opening. They needed to attract those non-traditional companies and really incentivize the commercial marketplace to bend and change to meet the needs the mission had. But we hadn't received, we had received our NDAA 17 pilot program authority, but we hadn't completed our implementation guidance. It was taking a little longer than everybody had hoped. And so they had to pivot and go back to a FAR-based model. But leveraging flexibilities in the FAR, this was a 15.3 source selection procurement, they structured their procurement and their resulting contracts into phased options, where the first phase was an initial article, and the second option period, right? The option at the discretion of the government for those companies that delivered an initial article that met the requirements of the procurement or of the program office. Phase 2 was an LRIP, a low rate of initial production delivery for testing. And after that LRIP models were delivered and tested for those companies that met those standards from the program office, the government had the discretion to award a follow-on CLIN. And so phase 3, that next phase, was a full rate of production. And these contracts got them all the way into a 5-year deployment of this capability with 5 vendors, all of whom now have the technology to sell to the government that meets our needs. So what a phenomenal model of a multi-contract, multi-phased, flexible contract structure that built up the technology that we needed to support our mission, kept it competitive so that we have options in our future state for procuring, all within the 4 corners of the FAR.
Wow, pretty amazing.
Something more amazing is how quickly that happened. So all contracts were awarded. They were about $1 million per contract. They were made within 4 months after the solicitation was released.
Wow.
So for that effort, that was a really great standard for them. Didn't quite get to 60 days, but certainly really sharp for that organization.
Success story nonetheless. All right, Mike, do you have any additional stories that you'd like to share about FAR flexibilities that DIU has engaged in?
We primarily focus, like I said, on the CSO and the OTAs. But for us, one element of that is before we start, our process starts with the DoD partner. So we start with the end in mind. In the early days of DIU, we'd take on all projects as a way to prove out the concept. We've done that, and now we've moved on to, as part of increasing the capability and capacity to transform the department, is to take on the truly transformative projects that can scale across department platforms. And a big part of that is starting with the end in mind. So with the DoD partner, we always start with the transition plan in mind, from a prototype OTA to a production OTA, and then where does it go from there? So we have those discussions very early on. Some of our transitions have moved on to various mechanisms, and at least 2 have moved on via a FAR-based contracting into programs of record to be able to provide that capability even more widely across the department. And again, I mentioned it before, OTs are one fantastic tool. The FAR is another great tool for that to scale across these services and platforms.
Mike, you raise a really good point. This agile principle of build with the end in mind should drive all of our work in federal procurement, right? It's a yes please, yes please requirement, and leveraging all of the authorities we have in our toolbox is what we need to be doing, right? The authority doesn't drive the procurement. The requirement drives which authority makes the most sense. And then, of course, some agencies have more authorities than others. I mean, we totally get that. But that's where you can take advantage of the authorities you have and look at them through a flexible, adaptive mindset.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I was going to hit on that point about really thinking about outcomes first, because that's critically important. And to Paulie's point about like structuring your contract, since we're talking about flexibilities, really for me, that is the way that we will be successful in scaling, especially with purchasing emerging technologies, specifically artificial intelligence tools that we're looking at to transform our procurement processes, and other robotic process automation tools as well, because the standard base plus 4 model, I don't think is an effective way to really take risks and scale and leverage properly. So that's the way that Paulie was talking about her modules, her different steps and phases. That's exactly how Pilot IRS works, because we were able to get contracts in place within weeks. We were able to really take advantage of those flexibilities and start with the simple first phase to really explore the art of the possible in a very small environment. We're not touching any systems. We don't have to deal with kind of ATOs. We'll get there for authority to operate. But for now, it's really about what is possible with small investment. And if it doesn't work out, great, no harm, no foul. Both parties go their way, and we go on and we learn from those mistakes and move forward. So that's very critical in that agile methodology of procurement and being flexible. But again, it's really about what is the outcome that we're trying to accomplish and how we get there. And that's how these contracts are modeled, and that's how these contracts are put in place so that we can use those inherent flexibilities, which do exist, right? It's right in FAR Point 101. You know, if it says that you can't do it, then you're okay, give it a shot. But unfortunately, a lot of folks get caught up by thinking, well, if it's not in the FAR, then I can't do it. And that obviously that's the opposite that we want our workforce to take a look at, is use the flexibilities that exist and then go forth and conquer. And as I mentioned, getting that leadership support to do that. So this is a great way of really looking at how we can be successful from the beginning now to scaling. But again, it has to focus on what is the outcome-based approach that has to be done up front.
That's right. Silence is permission to innovate. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Jaime brought up a lot. I agree, Paulie, that there's a lot to unpack in there. I think the first one I'm going to pick up that Jaime just mentioned was, look, I think we're at a significant inflection point that's only going to be visible through the lens of history as we go forward. Jaime mentioned before that in recent history, it was all very rigid acquisition. And now through various acquisition reform measures, the reform team on the Hill, we've gotten so many other tools that we need to continue to figure out how we string them along in a maybe not even a linear way, but allow for that prototyping that Jaime mentioned, where if the prototype doesn't work, we've only invested a small amount of money and we've learned a way that it doesn't work, and we can try something new and move on before we invest large amounts of money to really put that at scale.
Oh, please go ahead, Paulie.
I was going to say, you know, one of the other areas that Jaime touched on was just taking advantage of the flexibilities we do have. And this gets to Professor Josie's question below a little bit as well, is, you know, can we innovate beyond technology in federal procurement? And, you know, not just at DHS, but now teams across the federal government are thinking about that silence is authority to innovate within the FAR. And I'll just give you an example. This past fiscal year, in fact, the contract was just awarded in September. Our National Flood Insurance Program out of the FEMA, right, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, had a requirement to establish a contract that was flexible to support comms, communications for the NFIP program. They ended up deciding that a BPA was going to be in the best interest of their future needs and the flexibilities they needed from their contract. they were buying communication services. And so typically in our federal contracting process, we get a nice paper proposal, we read it, we do a lot of writing about what we read, and then we give that big batch of writing to our source selection authority or selection official, and they make a decision, write some more, and we put a paper contract in file. Well, these guys understood what they needed to buy. They understood that there would be a lot of competition. They structured their submission in a phased approach. So it was 2 phases. It was an advisory down select. So the government gave some advice based on the evaluation of the first set of factors. Companies decided whether or not they were going to move forward. What they evaluated in phase 1, extremely relevant to what they were buying. They looked at a marketing plan, 2 30-second spots or 30-second spots for radio scripts, and 2 400-word posts for Twitter or Facebook. And they evaluated that to make their down select. And then their down select was actually a marketing video that they evaluated along with a requirements document that related to the work that they were going to execute under the BPA. Short, sweet, all related to what they were buying. And so I think innovation can go even to how we evaluate our contracts, not just how we shape them and then what we're buying.
Great. And for the other panelists, if you did not have a chance to see Professor Joshi's question, she asks, does innovation go beyond technology acquisition? Can anyone share an example of one, please? Mike or Jaime, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, maybe not so much an example, but just to kind of, at the heart of what Paulie is saying is that innovation is not a process for buying technology. Innovation is a mindset. And it's really about, questioning, why are we doing it this way? I mean, is there a better way to do things? Let's test new ways of doing things. And that's really what I'm talking about, is creating that ecosystem and crowdsourcing those ideas, because I'm constantly on the lookout, both internally and externally, for better ways of doing things and trying to bring that into my agency and see if it's plausible and if we can do it. And if we can't, why? Right. So because if it's already worked, if it's already proven, then perhaps it's something that we should look at integrating into our processes so that we can buy, product, services. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just doing things that make sense, right? Better business sense that save time and money for all parties involved. I mean, for me, that's really what we're trying to do with looking at these flexibilities is, looking at improving the way that we effectively execute government management. And that's really, for me, the crux of what innovation is about, and why we're doing these things is to be better stewards of taxpayer funds, sure, but it's really about improving the way that we are government managers. And that really focuses from leadership. Again, I hit that theme very hard because I think it's very important to do that. But ultimately, we want folks to question, why are we doing it this way? Is there a better way of doing it? I mean, that for me, that's ultimately what I want my workforce to do, because I can teach anybody about the FAR and checking boxes and compliance, but it's those critical thinking skills and it's that business mindset that I really need to be successful and be transformative. And that, for me, that's the crux of what innovation is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with both my colleagues. We look to prototype technology, but also methodologies is how I put it. We don't want to just get the next improvement on the model. We want to find that leaps and bounds ahead technology. And how do we get that? How do we prototype that technology? It's by prototyping our methodologies. I'll use a quick example of a prototype we have for a drone capability. We down selected to 6 domestic drone manufacturers. There are no domestic drone manufacturers now, and we're working to build that ecosystem. But what we were able to do is through our the CSO methodology that we prototyped, we were able to get the drone end users together with the designers, and they could actually go through all the issues with it. One of the things was like the toggles on the remote control weren't big enough to be operated by folks in combat with gloves on their hands. Those kind of things that you wouldn't get through a normal process, but by being able to change the methodology by which we do it, we're able to get even better technology. So I think it is absolutely not only technology acquisition, but methodology acquisition, and there's a culture element as well.
Great. So, Professor, I hope that answered some of your questions to give you 3 different examples of what the government has been doing and can do. And with that, we'll move on to budget flexibilities, another area that we are exploring a way to do things differently. So, Mike, would you like to touch on budget flexibilities within DIU's work?
Yeah, you bet. This issue became very clear working with the commercial sector, trying to move at commercial speeds. There's been a lot of energy, a lot of activity around acquisition reform over the last, decade probably, if not longer. With the 809 panel, Congressman Thornberry's reform team up on the Hill has given a lot of authorities, a lot of tools to use. But there's been no accompanying budget reform that goes along with that. And what we found is that the department's budgeting process is at least a 2-year process, and it's not really congruent with leveraging the rapidly emerging commercial technology. Quick example I'll give is we talked about starting with the end in mind, but if by chance that prototype is successful early and it's out of the budgeting cycle, it could be a 12 to 18-month delay before it moves into more funding. The technology will become stale, the company will go out of business, and we will lose that opportunity to get that technology. There's been a lot of talk about the way we buy different things. If you think of it as a scale with aircraft carriers on one side and paper on the other, there should be some different way to do it. There's been talk about an innovation fund that's managed at the vice chairman and the joint chiefs level or at the service chief level, to have money to be able to bridge these gaps, to help fill in that valley of death that I think we're all now familiar with, to help get that technology into the department.
Thank you. All right, Paulie, any thoughts on budget flexibilities within your realm?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples. One is our colleagues across our line of business over in the CIO shop are they've done a lot of market research. They've identified companies who are happy to be in the space where they help with prototyping and exploration of solutions early in our acquisition process with no strong interest in having to go continue forward and then build or buy what they're prototyping. And we recognize that as we work through our analysis of alternatives for our IT acquisitions, getting the big monster contracts in place, moving them out only to learn that they're not working as well as we intended them to be. We've learned some agencies more than others the hard way about that. And so moving to more modular contracts, and especially ones early on that allow us the opportunity to prototype and pilot and explore different options before we make our decisions about the final requirements and needs of the solution, we are learning is the best way to go, right? And so we have been working with our CFO and our CIO on what is the best, how does that look? What's the best strategy to get that in place, to give our program some early money early on to do that prototyping as they look across the AOAs and analysis of alternatives. I'm sorry, I hate using acronyms like that, and move out with their buying decisions. And so that's been a ongoing conversation, and we're really starting to get some traction around that in the year ahead. The other thing we've learned is that by working together, obviously within our agency, but also across agencies, there's a lot we can do to power up our budgets. And so we have an acquisition system called Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System. It's a great tool, but getting information out of it isn't as easy as everybody would hope it would be. And so we're working on looking at prototypes of how artificial intelligence can really help us extract appropriate information based on what we're buying from our system. And we started with a prototyping and piloting approach. And so we have a bunch of vendors that have contracts that are currently in phase 2. They've proved out an MVP, and now they're developing those prototypes into pilot ready solutions. And instead of DHS just going at it alone, we partnered now formally with 10 federal agencies across the federal government. Those folks provided funding and data for testing and training, or training and testing those prototypes. And so by powering up and working together, we can also leverage our budgets respectively to improve our outcomes.
Great. Well, that segues us very well into our next topic of discussion, which is connection across components, which is so imperative because we have so many cross-component needs. So Paulie, back to you for what DHS has been doing.
So I guess the short answer is a lot, and it's the best space I've ever been in my entire career, both federal, academic, and private sector, best space ever. The reality is that collaboration is the key to success here, right? We've talked about it at the acquisition team level. We've talked about how getting a team together early and having them work together daily, another great agile principle that applies to federal procurement, is critical to our outcomes. But we also have learned through our work in the pill that not just testing these ideas, but then sharing them is really where we power up. This framework of testing, getting the feedback, and sharing is the key to the successes we've had so far on our journey at DHS in the pill. And the way we've helped to do that is by making sure that as we've coached one team at a time, we've provided opportunities for those teams to talk to their peers, both within DHS and across the government, and share those stories, right? I've shared kind of 2 or 3 vignettes about their cases, but those were the team's cases. And in each of those instances, the teams have spent time with us in learning webinars, talking to groups of 500 plus of their peers, sharing their stories. We've also participated actively in the Acquisition Innovation Advocate Council. Jaime and I are regularly engaged in various initiatives under the federal-wide council. Within DHS, we structured an internal council. So each of our DHS components has an assigned acquisition innovation advocate appointed by the head of contracting activity at that agency. We partner up and power up. And so that's our way to learn from the grassroots, to share with the grassroots, and to make sure we're understanding systemically what's happening across our contracting activities across the department as a whole, and then actively collaborating with our peers across the federal government in this space to continuously learn from each other. I could go more into it, but I'm going to give my colleagues here on the panel a little bit of time to talk as well.
Yeah, I agree with
go ahead, Mike, sorry.
With Paulie that innovation absolutely is a team sport. And I'll talk about 3 examples that DIU leverages. One of them is we work with other folks in the innovation ecosystem. We partner closely with DARPA. One great example is a project that they developed from a very, very early stage, which was automated detection and mitigation of unknown cybersecurity risks. As part of a Cyber Grand Challenge, it came out of there. We picked it up at a mid-level of development and carried it forward and eventually put it on a prototype contract and then about a $50 million production contract for the department. So we do try to work with all the folks in the innovation ecosystem to continue to develop their products. I also talked about scaling across the department, services and platforms. We took on a project using AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning for predictive maintenance. We started with an aircraft in the Air Force. We're able to show about a 30% reduction in unscheduled maintenance and about an 8% increase in mission capable rates, which is significant in a very short amount of time. And eventually we scaled it across other platforms in the Air Force, the F-16, the F-35, as well as the Army, wheeled vehicles and their rotary aircraft. So that's very exciting for us. And I think we awarded about a $100 million contract for that to keep scaling there. And the last example goes back to what I was talking about with a domestic drone capability. Trying to build the domestic drone capability and leveraging, as Paulie pointed out, the economic buying power across government. We prototyped a drone with mitigated security, cybersecurity risk. So there's no cybersecurity risk associated with it. And eventually we put it on the GSA schedule for not only the Department of Defense, but all of our partners across the executive branch to purchase those and leverage that buying power. We're working with the State Department, DHS, Customs and Border Patrol, as you could imagine, has a requirement for drone capability, as well as the FAA. So there are a lot of folks that were buying individual buys, and once we were able to harness all of that and put it together, really to advance a national security issue for the U.S. in general.
Yeah, internally at IRS, I mean, I can't stress enough how important that collaboration is. One of our important customer bases is our criminal investigative unit, who do very sophisticated work. I mean, I think the IRS, I mean, certainly I didn't know a lot about this. You know, the IRS is our taxpayer administration, but it's not just focused on those types of financial transactions. Our criminal investigative unit is doing amazing work, not only certainly in tax fraud and financial fraud, but really looking at cyber crime as a whole. And partnering with them has been important, because when they first learned about us standing up the PIB and using Pilot IRS, they were so on board, because look, we're using AI, we're trying to use machine learning. You know, we had to stay one step ahead of these cyber criminals who are very sophisticated, and our current contracting mechanisms aren't really working. So how can we try to use these agile methods to improve that? So it's been a wonderful collaboration. We just recently issued awards under Pilot IRS for a data mashing initiative to really take a look at very sophisticated cryptocurrency analysis to help them with their work. But that wouldn't be possible without the collaboration, not only internally, but externally from public-private partnerships that we've talked about, and really looking at that world that is foreign to many of us. A lot of folks don't understand these sophisticated models that are out there, but we're constantly asking through industry engagement and collaborating with different types of consortia who work with these very sophisticated technologies, and mostly non-traditional companies that have very interesting AI and machine learning tools. Hey, you know, we've got this need. Does anybody know about this? You know, or just even talk to them to get ideas. Has been a fascinating world to really learn a lot about the art of the possible, which is another theme that I like to use, because it really gives us an idea of what we can do for things we may not even be considering. And that's very important as well. Certainly when we start getting into now more sophisticated requirements development and trying to take a look at putting together the contracts, but it's that external collaboration, I think, that's also vital to try to get ideas internally so that we can try to get the best strategic partnerships to complete that mission. So we're very active in that as well, and certainly want to continue to do that with some of the groups and organizations that Paulie and Mike had mentioned.
Thanks, Jaime. So all of these innovative tools and processes, these things could not happen without a shift in culture. So I'd like to now discuss a little bit about the workforce and leadership, culture change, innovation coaches. Paulie, can we start with you?
Yeah, without a doubt. What we're finding is that there's a few must-haves for culture to change within a contracting activity to drive some of the really important outcomes that Mike and Jaime and I have been sharing with your excellent support today, Hallie. So let me start back by saying those important factors. Like, one, no matter what, you've got to have dedicated leadership really ready to take that cover for the teams. They have to have evidence that in action to build the trust. At DHS, we've had a few failures, and that has been just part of the learning process. And so even calling our organization a lab and encouraging that, you know, all of the best inventors have failed along the way, attitude in the work we do has really helped drive that culture. But so has the fact that the most senior leaders in our organization have stood behind teams when their great ideas didn't pan out as intended. And that's been a real driving motivator for our workforce to feel comfortable and continue to bring their ideas to the table and be willing to go against the tide and start changing our norms. The other thing is that that level of inoculation of scrutiny from those teams has to happen not just within an agency, but across the government. And so, leadership driving conversations with our oversight community, right? Be it the GAO or the Hill, helping encourage and foster that willingness to explore the art of the possible and support teams that are driving good change in our system is a real important driver. We have seen that our leadership is willing to go to bat in all of those forums for us. And we've actually established a really good rapport with the folks that handle bid protest decisions at the Government Accountability Office, so that we can learn from them, just like they're seeing what we're doing in some bid protest decisions. And the outcomes of those have also helped drive our culture change. When these ideas get tested and the protest decisions come back and the government's persevered, and our oversight community is saying these are permissible exercises of authority in the federal acquisition regulation, that continues to help drive comfort for our teams on the ground. And then finally, we really have found that giving the team not just the go do good things mantra, but here is support to do that. Here is an innovation coach assigned to your team. Here are resources that we're providing. Here's training, that those power up and give our folks the full suite of tools they need to bring their good ideas and their willingness to innovate to the table and to bear out for our mission.
Great, thank you. Mike or Jaime, did you want to add anything in terms of the leadership culture shift at your organizations?
Go ahead, Jaime.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it already, and it's hard to add to Paulie's comments because they're so spot on. We're seeing the same things, because we're still, I would argue, very much an immature organization. Certainly, when you take a look at DHS, but we're still leading the way in a lot of things. So we understand that we have a lot of work to do, but that's the important thing, is that understanding, because we're currently undergoing quite a big shift in how we're looking at doing things. We have customer experience transformations going on that are continuing from the last couple years. So this is a monumental shift in how we're doing things. And we recently completed our annual industry survey, and just right off the bat is, innovation and how we do business and the need to do things more collaboratively. So that is a known thing. And I just wanted to mention that because, we have the data, we know where we have to work. And that's really important now, because now we can put together the strategic planning to fill those gaps and really move the needle. And that's an exciting time to be in an organization that is not just kind of talking the talk, but actually wanting to improve it through leadership direction, by having the resources to do it, and also having the flexibility and the trust of leadership to be able to really execute this transformative effort and really shift culture. I mean, we're talking about shifting federal culture. That's a very time-consuming process. It's not going to happen tomorrow. That's going to take months and years of dedication, but it's every day that one single step that you take to move towards that journey is very important. And that's what we're doing, is moving that needle step by step, using orals on this RFP, and doing better market research to be more collaborative and improving competition on this contract. I mean, that's how the shift starts and how the shift will continue. So that's what we're doing. And certainly we're looking at how Paulie and DHS are executing, in addition to our AIA Council for their great feedback on how to get those ideas internally executed and how to transform ourselves through proven methods. Because another thing that we find is that people want to change, but they just don't know how, right? They don't have the resources to do it. So, we're looking at different ways of getting that information out there. And there's tons of information that's available. Certainly, the Acquisition Gateway and the periodic table of acquisition innovations is a great resource as well. And I see that Paulie had put that link in our chat. So if you didn't see that, please take a look. But those are the types of things that we're looking at to really consolidate a lot of the great information that's out there so we can provide the resources to our workforce and then help them be successful and help them take those risks that we've been talking about so we can see that transformative change in real time. And it's a pretty exciting time to be part of this change.
I mean, you bring up such good points. First of all, the learning goes both ways. DHS is learning from our partners across the government as much as we're hopefully adding value through the work we're doing to our partners. The other thing you've mentioned, though, I want to hit on is the importance of information. One of the things that DHS has done over the last few years is partner with our Science and Technology Academic Center of Excellence. The center is called the Center for Accelerating Operational Efficiency, and Arizona State University does manage that center for us. And we've been privileged enough to have support from research faculty specializing in supply chain management and organizational culture, help drive information across our organization. And so for 3 years, we've launched a culture survey to our entire DHS acquisition workforce, 14,000 folks. And we're tracking the results from that survey. We've leveraged a survey called the Competing Values Framework that really looks at key high values of innovation, process control, human relations and teamwork, and then mission delivery, mission outcomes. And those 4 key high order themes and values, I think you guys have all heard, really came out through the conversation Mike, Jaime, and I have been having here with you this morning. And looking at how our department and then our operational components, including the organization as a whole and the contracting activity separately, are prioritizing those values is really helping us advance the conversation. Seeing that we prioritize innovation and human relations lower than process, and that we prioritize mission outcomes above all else is pretty expected. What has been less expected is the fact that over the last 3 years, the prioritization of human relations and innovation have been driving up. And in fact, if we want to level out the prioritization of innovation and human relations with process change, if we keep up the current rate of change, we're only 4 years out from that. And that, I think, hopefully gives all of us in federal acquisition hope that with real commitment to the change and to providing the support and resources our workforce needs to be able to deliver what we're asking of them, we're not really that far out from optimizing in better ways our procurement system.
I'd like to pull on both of those threads that Jaime and Paulie mentioned. Look, the workforce is a critical part of modernizing acquisition and innovation. I know a lot of people talk about the acquisition workforce is a risk-averse workforce that somehow finds its way back to a status quo equilibrium position. But really, if you think about it, that's not risk-averse. That is incredibly risky, and it's going to be even more so moving forward. So Jaime and Paulie are spot on. It's a leadership issue, the right tools, and getting the right info, but also a cultural awareness piece. Paulie talked about understand the culture of different organizations. And I would even take that up one level. It's important to understand the culture of the tech ecosystem in the US. And it's important for the tech ecosystem to understand the culture of the department. We're never going to get the department to adopt the flat, agile, fail early, fail fast mantra of Silicon Valley. But if we can get both sides to understand what's important to the other, then I think that will certainly allow for more rapid innovation into the department. And the last thing I think is a key element to this is incentivizing the right behaviors, incentivizing the behaviors we want to get away from that risk aversion, but to assess risk, mitigate risk, and for leadership to support that with the right tools.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have a couple questions. This one's definitely in the realm of what we're discussing. It's from Hale Sesan. How do you see innovation to impact/change early and often industry engagements ahead of procurements, particularly in the post-COVID world?
I think any of us can take this, but I'm happy to start, and I'll keep it short. The post-COVID world has brought out real comfort with using video conferencing platforms across the federal government. I'm seeing teams internally meet more often because they could just hop on a quick video chat, and that's encouraging. That's encouraging to see. But I'm also seeing the acquisition workforce leverage that technology in great ways to collaborate with our industry partners. I've seen fantastic use of video platforms for industry days, for one-on-one meetings with industry, for pre-solicitation conferences, for discovery sessions one-on-one with companies before full proposals are submitted, and for use in the evaluation phase where we're doing things like oral presentations, product demonstrations, leveraging the virtual platform. So I don't think that's going away. I think that's helped make it a little bit less logistically challenging for procurement teams to have those engagements. We no longer have to coordinate schedules and conference rooms and visitor access to federal buildings. It's a little bit easier to approach and touch. And so that is really, I think, a fantastic byproduct of a really difficult time that we've faced as a nation and as a global community.
Yeah, I think to kind of pick that up, I agree. I mean, the tragedy that is COVID, I think one of the positive things to come out of it is that it's going to be a change agent to really start adopting some innovative things, leveraging commercial technology to solve problems. In fact, one of our projects that we were working on was an early detection of illness for men and women in uniform based on temperature, heart rate, oxygen use, et cetera, all those things. And we were able to adjust it rather quickly to get after the COVID issue and rapidly prototype that with folks at the Naval Academy, West Point, and others to start detecting the COVID spread. But I think that it's going to, through the lens of history, again, it's going to be seen as a significant change agent to really force a lot of innovation.
Yeah, my question is, why weren't we leveraging these technology platforms pre-COVID, frankly? I mean, given what we've learned and how comfortable we've become and really seeing the benefits of it. I mean, we've had very similar experiences, as Paulie mentioned, doing industry days, doing outreach. We're a little bit more challenged on the type of platforms that we can use, and we're adapting to that and continue to do that. But I just find them to be excellent tools. I would argue that perhaps maybe we're a little bit more busy now than what we were pre-COVID, simply because, you know, we've got lots of scheduled meetings, we have lots of outreach. And I just think it's a lot easier, right? Because, you know, we can hop on a Zoom call for 30 minutes with the vendor who has a solution that we're interested in, right? As opposed to meeting in person and going through security, and you know, that whole process is a 2-hour process for a 30-minute meeting. So that's a little bit challenging, but certainly from industry standpoint, I would hope, and certainly feedback that I've seen is that it's also great for them to be able to do better outreach, save BNP dollars as opposed to traveling to things and having just better opportunities to engage. So hopefully that will continue and certainly expand once we get back to normal, like whatever that looks like. But certainly, I think leveraging these tools to collaborate has been an added bonus to kind of the work environment that we've created. And I think a lot more people are just more comfortable in this environment. So I hope it continues to really find different opportunities to be more collaborative and engage and leverage these platforms for the type of opportunities that they present to do that.
Absolutely. We have about 2 minutes left, and we have another question, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to pivot back to CSOs. But the question from Eric Lofgren is, for the panel, what does modular contracting look like in the FAR or outside the FAR? And does that align with outcomes orientation if each order creates only incremental capability?
I'm happy to jump on it. I think we've hopefully given a few examples along the way today about what some options around modular contracting can look like. The helium, non-helium backpack program, a really great example of modular contracting. The prototypes and pilots that we've described along the way, similar. Both whatever authority you're using, you can structure those contracts for modular development. And when you say, it creates only incremental capability, you're right, but we're learning along the way, right? And so there's a lot, modular contracting provides us the opportunity to pivot, to correct, and to also steer away from opportunity or from options and capabilities that aren't meeting our needs or don't prove out. And so being able to invest a little to learn and then to adjust course is the true benefit of modular contracting. And so I think that incremental capability adds a lot of value to the end capability that we are eventually able to procure. And that helps us by leveraging our taxpayers' dollars more prudently so that we, when we do go all in, we have a higher confidence that we're going to be successful at the end.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the outcome-based approach is the first thing that we're doing. And through that learning, through increments and through the different phases, we're going to get closer to that goal as we go along and learn and integrate that learning into the program. So I think the modular contracting is certainly the best way to do that for technology buys. There was also, what does modular contracting look like in the FAR? I mean, modular contracting is not something new. I mean, it's covered in the FAR under Part 39. But certainly, I think the learning that Paulie said for us has certainly been important with our pilot IRS program and seeing different ways to move the ball forward and learn and integrate and now make sure that we are doing the right things with our industry partners and making sure that also importantly, we don't create shadow IT, because there's been opportunities now to kind of forget that and say, oh, well, ATO is a big problem, so let's kind of create shadow IT outside of it. And that's not the point and the goal of doing these things. Obviously, you cannot do that, nor should you. And I don't recommend doing that. Obviously, working with cyber and working with IT is important to do that, and that needs to be done with your customers. So this is all a team approach, but really that learning, I think, is critical so that you can get to that outcome and lower the risk.
Absolutely. Now, I'd be remiss if we didn't have at least 1 minute to chat about CSOs. We are just about out of time. There is going to be a Q&A section with our panelists later, but Paulie, would you like to, and Mike, would you like to briefly cover some good nuggets of advice in terms of CSOs and some of the responses to COVID-19 while we're on that topic?
Yeah, you bet. So as I mentioned earlier on, DIU pioneered the CSO process when we stood up as a way to look like a commercial entity. Looking to award prototype contracts in 60 to 90 days, I said. We're at about 120 days now and field the technology in 24 months. Part of that process, we get away from a requirements document and we just look for a simply stated problem, half a page or a paragraph. And then we seek a 5-page white paper or a 15-page slide deck from the vendors in response to that. And that allows us to go through a competitive process, which by the authority to use OTAs, we need to do in order to go from a prototype to a production contract without competing it. It's been very successful for us. And again, it's allowed us to move at commercial speeds and commercial cycles, which is as important as the commercial speed in technology.
Thanks. Paulie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think, to keep it very short, COVID-19 hit, we leveraged our CSOP authority to put out an umbrella DHS-wide solicitation to get industry's good ideas from the process. We've had phenomenal responses. Over 425 proposals between April and October were received. A significant percentage of those, and if I took a minute to look up the numbers, I'd be, but I think it's 57% small businesses, even more of those were non-traditional companies. So great industry response. While not all of them panned out from we have funding and we have a need, we've used the opportunity to learn a lot about the commercial marketplace for this along the way. And that's beneficial for us short-term and long-term as we plan out. But contracts have been awarded. The most recent one for our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is going to help them leverage communication signals capabilities, alternative pathways for our national security and emergency response communications programs, awarded in 18 days from receipt of final proposal or receipt of full proposal to award. So when we have a need and when we see a fit to that need, we have been able to create very effective contracts using our CSO authority to go after it and to make efficient awards that help bring new commercial entrants into our sector to help us.
Hallie, quick follow-up here. We've had about 2,300 companies from 45 states apply. We've awarded about 180 contracts in 23 states. Of those, 134 are non-traditionals, 60 are first-time vendors that evaluated the defense marketplace, said no thanks. We've been able to bring them in, and then about 50 of those have been small businesses, which is where a lot of the innovation lies. So it's been it's a quite successful model, and we're glad to see it start to scale across government.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so we are actually out of time. There is one question that I will write down that has been unanswered, and we will put it in our post-conference Zoom session. I wanted to take just 1 second to thank you all so much, and thank you all for attending. And we look forward to having more discussions with you shortly.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Take care.